Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about something very controversial in the track and field world, and that is, should we add more events to professional track and field? Now, no, I'm just going to be thinking about professional events here. I don't want to think about high school and college because that brings a whole nother different scheduling component into it, especially in high school. But I do want to look at the professional level. And obviously, I know there's some one off races we'll have of weird distances, and that will kind of be thrown into a meet, or especially in the kind of series type meets, we'll have some interesting events thrown in, like in the Diamond League meets and stuff. But I want to talk about, should we expand track and field at, for example, the Olympics and World Championships to encompass more events? Should we put the official world record stamp of approval on more events? Because if you don't know, there are two different categories of records when you look on the World Athletics website. The first one is world record. That's what we're familiar with. These are commonly contested distances, and most of them appear at indoor world championships or outdoor world championships, or are historically very highly contested distances. So this is things, the 60 meter, the 100 meter, the 200 meter, the 800 meter, 1500 meter, the mile. That is actually the only metric, I believe, measure of a distance that is included in being an actual world record. The 3,000, the 5,000, the 10,000, 50-meter hurdles, 400-meter hurdles, 3,000 steeple. Those aren't all of them. And then you have like the common field events. Those are some of the kinds of things that are included in the category of what is a world record. And then you have world best performances. These are less contested events, and they are things that don't appear at major championships, and they're not as competitive, so they don't get that highly sought after world record mark. But World Athletics still keeps track of who is the top, the best of the best in that discipline. Now, I do want to mention that this is not inclusive of every single event, because there are some events that are so obscure or so underraced that they don't even have the world best marking. One that immediately comes to mind to me, because this was a whole rabbit hole I went down a couple of years ago, is the ultra multi-event records, like the tetracathlon and like crazy stuff like that, where each athlete is doing like a bajillion different events. Those are kept by a different organization, not World Athletics, because they are so obscure and they're extremely rare. You won't even find those as like a one-off at a Diamond League meeting. You'd have to go to like some small town in Finland to contest them, probably. But those are distinctions that are really important to make when we talk about this. However, I do want to also note, not every world record is something that is necessarily contested at an Olympics, at a World Championships, or at an Indoor World Championships. For example, the 1,000 meters is technically classified as a world record, even though it's not a official discipline at any of these events. Same thing with the mile, although that's also more of, because the mile is such a historic and popular distance. And then there's also the 1 hour run is kept as a world record, even though it isn't featured in any of those events, as well as things like the road events, which are seeing more popularity now with the European Road Running Championships, which is something that I absolutely love. Those are kept as world records for the 5, 10, half marathon, and marathon, as well as the 50K and 100K. And then there's also a bunch of different race walking distances. Race walking distances switch out kind of a lot between Olympic cycle to Olympic cycle and World Championship cycle to World Championship cycle. And then there's also things like different relays, the 4x2 and the 4x8, as well as the DMR and the 4x15, are all kept as official world records, even though they aren't something that are seen in any of these major world championships. So that's an argument that can be made, is that the things that are classified as world records rather than world bests and yet still aren't included in these events maybe should be, or should be downgraded to world bests, or something in the middle, maybe some for some, others for others. And that's definitely an argument that I can see, because the 1,000 meter and the 1,500 meter obviously have widely different rates of being contested, and you could argue one record might be easier to get than another, although that record is from 1968. I know it was a more common distance back in the day, to be fair, but it is just something interesting to note. However, when we think about adding new events, what I think is really important is to think, is this going to bring new talent to an Olympic or World Athletics stage? Because look, as much as I love to see the Cole Hawkers, the Jakob Ingebrigtsens, and the Sifan Hassans of the world competing in every single event, we don't need to give them more work to do. They already have plenty of work to do, if that makes sense. I really think that when we think about, okay, we want to bring new events in, we should think, are we also going to bring new talent in? Or are we going to take talent that is maybe only at a national level and bring them to an international level with the inclusion of this new event? Or are we going to be taking additional athletes for this new event? Because that's kind of, I have seen a lot of people saying they want the 3K in the outdoor realm, at World Championships or Olympics. My honest opinion on that is there's already so much overlap between the 15 and the 3K that, I mean, the 15 and the 5K, that between the 15, 3K, and 5K, it would just create a lot more overlap. And I'm not saying this can't be avoided, because it definitely can. You can use the schedule to make it so that you couldn't contest both, say, the 3K and the 5K, or the 15 and the 3K. Now, will athletes grumble and moan about that? Yes. Yes, they will. But it is an option that you could have, where you could try to overlap them in such a way that it would bring new talent. However, you also have to think, is that new talent really new, or is it just the fourth and fifth placers from the Olympic trials in that other event? Just something to consider. And for me, when I kind of sort in my head of which events to be included would bring new athletes to the world stage, something comes to mind that you might not think of, and that is two relay events, the 4x8 and the distance medley relay. Now, I don't think that both of these should in any world be included in the Olympics necessarily, or World Championships, but I think one or the other you could make an interesting case for. I honestly think the 4x8 kind of does beat out the distance medley relay in this argument, simply because the distance medley, I could see you using a hodgepodge of people you're already bringing from other events. Whereas with a 4x8, you could almost have a similar thing to what you have with the 4x4, where you have a 4x4 pool where top six at the Olympic trials in the US, I don't know how it is in other countries, top six at the Olympic trials are kind of in the mix for the relay pool. And some athletes who are individually contesting will probably be a part of the relay, as well as two or three that are not individually contesting that come in that top six at Olympic trials. Because you also have to consider that you have a heat of the relays and then you have the final. So some of those athletes will only be in the heat, some of them will be in the heats and the final. And a lot of times they do have the opportunity to run really well and run themselves into a spot running in the final, which I always think is fun to watch. And I do think that so many countries have such a deep field in the 800. I mean, we saw like the recent Olympic 800 meter and the recent World Championships 800 meter. Those were wild. There is such deep talent, I feel like, from so many different countries, that I feel like that could definitely be made to work. So that would be a 3,200 meter relay 4 legs 800 meters. And like I said, I think it would be really interesting to have a pool for the 800 where if you're in the top 6 at the Olympic trials, you would potentially have the opportunity to go to the Olympics or the World Championships, if we're talking about the World Championships, and run in a heat or a final of a 4x800. I think that would be really interesting. The current world record, because this is actually categorized as a world record, is held by the Soviet Union from 1984. It is 750.17. So that could be an interesting kind of mark to chase. That's another thing, is it would be interesting to see how quickly a lot of these are doping era records for the under contested events. And it would be interesting to see if those could be broken or how fast these could be broken if we kind of elevated events to a world stage. Now, obviously, there are always going to be issues with adding new events. You have to alter the schedule, you have to alter the way you do qualifications, especially with a relay to make room for the relays. But I think in the case of a 4x8, it would be a pretty simple swap because we already kind of see these with the 4x1 and the 4x4. I even think it could potentially be interesting to have a mixed 4x8. However, I don't love the idea personally. I feel like it doesn't have that same component of elevating to the next level. But I think just a men's and just a women's 4x8 could be really cool to see. Although if that's the direction they want to take it, then that would be interesting because I think they are perhaps trying to make all the relays have a mixed component to them, as I know we will be seeing the 4x100 contested in these large events starting, I believe, in 2026. It is kind of a down year, 2026, but going forward from now, I will believe that we will start seeing the mixed 4x1, which I think will be super interesting, and I honestly can't wait to see how that all unfolds. I think it will be a very interesting transition because the whole thing with the handoffs and everything, that'll be interesting. That's another discussion though. So in my personal opinion, the 4x8 is my top choice for if I had to pick any event to add from the current world records list. That is the one that I would pick. And there is definitely an argument to be had that we shouldn't overexpand because it will just make the competition get flatter. It will make it so that there's less concentrated talent, and concentrated talent is what makes great races. I definitely see that argument, but also trackflation. There are so many people with so much talent spread out all over the world, and I feel like seeing more of it is always something that's going to make me really, really, really excited for the future of track and field. However, I definitely think that there are some events that would just be rinse and repeats. I think the 4x2 would be something that would be so difficult to implement. I love running 4x2s, if I'm honest with you, but I think it would be difficult just to see that just because of the overlap between the 4x1, 4x4, 4x2. There would be some overlap between the 4x4 and the 4x8, but I feel like it's a lot less. With how competitive the 400 has become, it's a lot rarer nowadays to see someone who doubles in the 4x8 or the 400 and the 800, rather than it's more common to see maybe a 200 400 type of runner. They do still exist, they are just a little bit less common, I think. And also, I do like the mixed relays. I just want to put that out there. I'm not saying that the mixed relays are a bad idea because I think they're super cool, unique, fun, and interesting. However, I just, I have concerns with overexpanding and the dilution of the field, but it can definitely go both ways for sure. And if you are curious, there have also been some interesting mixed relays that I do want to touch on that I have seen at World Relays Championships, which are super obscure events that are used to decide who will qualify into the heats at World Championships, or I believe at the Olympics they use them as well, although I'm not 100% sure. It might just be World Championships. But along with every country that is strong in athletics sending people you've never heard of, which is always kind of interesting. Along with that, They will usually throw in some very interesting and weird events, including the mixed shuttle hurdles and the 2x2 by 400-meter relay. Now, the shuttle hurdles, no baton, one side, the other side, run, 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 run. It's in like a 110-meter format. I have also seen some high school meets do that in a 55-meter format, which was interesting. And the 4x4 and the 2x2 by 400 is one athlete runs 400, another athlete runs 400, the first athlete runs 400 again, the second athlete runs 400 again, which I actually think is an interesting concept, not necessarily for a widespread implementation, but it was really cool to see kind of as a one-up. And honestly, that's kind of how I feel about a lot of the events in the World Best category. A lot of them can be cool to see as one-offs, but you wouldn't necessarily want to have them in a major championship. Again, a lot of it is because of the just amount of overlap that you will have. Like the 300 meters, the 600 meters, you're just going to get so much overlap with events like that. Same with like the 2K steeplechase. A lot of the kind of road races can easily get a lot of overlap. One that I do think is interesting is the 24-hour run. Like, I definitely think I can see how that could be cool and different and kind of attract ultra marathoners. But I don't know. I feel like ultra marathon running is not at this point competitive enough that we could see kind of a wider implementation into something like World Championships or the Olympics. I think it's getting there, and I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation to have 5 or 10 years down the road. But I just think we're not there yet. With that being said, though, guys, what do you think? Do you think we should keep the amount of pro track and field events exactly as they are? Or do you think there's room for growth and new additions? And if you think there is, do you think the 4x8 is a solid pick, or do you have your eyes on something else? Let me know in the comments down below. And in the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see y'all later. Bye!